Hi, I'm James Faupel. I'm the Restoration and Ecology Supervisor here at the Litzsinger Road Ecology Center with the Missouri Botanical Garden. And today I'm going to talk to all you wonderful shuttery volunteers about how to get better photos and trying to predict what bees are going to be doing on different types of flowers. Because every flower shape makes the bees act very differently. And so depending on what you're looking at, will really determine on how long the bee's going to be on that flower and how long you have to get that photo before they skedaddle. This is monarda fistulosa. This is our wild bergamot or bee balm, people call it, and it's a mint family member. And a lot of our mints have these either kind of rounded or flat-topped flowers, and then it's just a whole big grouping of flowers. So each one of these is not an individual flower. These little purple things that you see here on the outside edge and kind of just going all throughout the center are the individual flowers. So a bee will come to something like this with this tubular flower and land here, dip its proboscis, its tongue, down inside that flower to get the nectar, and then it gets pollen on the top of their head or on their backside, right here on the top of the flower. And so they'll go pretty quickly. They'll land here, drink from this one, drink from here, and they'll kind of just circle around unless they sense that there's no nectar left, like another bee had just been there. So they'll maybe just come and check it out and then leave and go to the next. But if you see them visiting this, it's a good chance that you'll be able to sit there and watch as they circle around and wait for them to come back around to the other side of the flower for you. So just knowing the patterns of how they're going to be acting on these flowers can really help you with your photography. And the little bees, if you see little bees on this, like the little sweat bees, they're not even going to be going into that tubular flower because they're too small. They're actually going to be landing right here where the pollen is, and they'll be there for a very short amount of time, just kind of curled up and grabbing some pollen and leaving. So be aware that they may not actually visit all these individual flowers. They may just come for one and move on to the actual next flower head. And that's a male brown-belted bumblebee. And here you can see a European honeybee going in. It looks like it might be actually robbing from behind. And you can see one of the little sweat bees there trying to go grab some pollen from the very tip. Right there. This is wild germander. This is another member of the mint family, like the monarda. And you can see on this one, it's not the big tight clusters that we saw before, and there's actually a little European woolcarder bee just buzzing around. This is one of the native flowers that the European woolcarder bee goes to. But these are very spaced out, and you can see that a lot of times these kind of spiked flowers, they usually start at the bottom and start blooming and then work their way up. So this middle section here are the ones that are in full bloom. You can see that there's some that are a little bit discolored looking. You might even be able to like kind of pull on them and see if that one didn't want to fall. But sometimes these lower ones that don't look so great are not going to get visited by bees. Those are spent flowers that have already been pollinated, and then these are going to be producing seeds soon. And you can see that up here are flowers that are going to be in the next few days to the next following week that will be blooming. So know that the bee, if it does land here and there are resources still available, it's going to be just visiting really quickly, and then shooting off to the next plant. So know you don't have a lot of time when there's just a few flowers available like this. And if a bee had just visited this, you might see a bee fly up and check it out for a half second and then leave because there's just nothing available to it at the moment. The plant hasn't produced enough nectar to give to the next bee. But so know that you don't have as much time as you might think because like these 4 flowers down here, 4 or 5 flowers down here are already spent. And these look a little spent here. It really looks like about maybe 4 to 5 flowers that are still viable on this flower head right here. And see here on this Culver's root, again, it's another long stand of these flowers as it blooms up the stalk. You'll be able to see that the bees are taking their time. There's so many flowers all in one spot, kind of like that wild germander that we looked at earlier. But they're going to be able to spend a lot more time on these individuals, so you'll have a lot more time to take photos. You can even see the little bees have to kind of fly from one to the other, whereas the European honeybee and the bumblebees can just climb over this whole flower head. So it gives you a lot more time to sit and view, and they are very undisturbed. You can even see I can get my finger pretty close to these bees without disturbing them, so you can get your camera pretty close. And these are 2 members here. This is a purple coneflower and this is a gray-headed coneflower. These are both members of the aster family, and aster family members are composite flowers. So things like sunflowers you'll be seeing soon. There's a false sunflower over there. Asters and goldenrods in the fall. These are all composite flowers, and so similar to like the mints when they're just all clustered together like the monarda that we saw, there's going to be on each of these flower heads many individual little flowers. And so if you see a bee landing on this gray-headed coneflower, you can see all these dark spots on here. Those are the individual flowers. This one here is just about to bloom. You can see it's still got the gray head that people talk about. When a bee lands on this, it's going to be on this flower for quite a while because there's so much resources available to them right here in this single flower. So if you saw like a brown-belted bumblebee, which is a common visitor of this, it would land on here and just kind of circle around this thing multiple times, searching all the different flowers. So you know you have a long period of time on this flower to get some photos. And move in slow. Don't move in really fast and scare off the bees. You can have plenty of time on this. You know that they're going to be there for a while if they just landed on it. If they've been on it for a while, if you just saw the bee, it's quite possible they might be leaving and going to another nearby one very shortly. But it's the same thing with this purple coneflower. All these bright colors that you see here on this flower head are not necessarily actually open at this point in time. They bloom starting on this outside ring and start working their way towards the center, and that's when it becomes that kind of cone shape. So you can see this one's kind of flat right now. So if a bee landed on this right now, it'd probably just be working this outside kind of donut and then leave, because there's no actual floral resources open yet on this middle section. And that's how it's going to be on a lot of those aster family members. The bees will be working around in a circle pattern, looking for all the flowers on the open ring of flowers. But usually that whole head is never fully open at once. It slowly opens. Alright, here we have a grouping of 3 different members of the aster family. So again, composite flowers. And you can see, if you look at each of these closely, these ones right here are the ones that are currently in bloom. So all this outside edge area has already flowered and is probably already starting to produce seed. But this right here, so if a bee landed in here, this is a false sunflower, they would circle very quickly here in this center spot. This black-eyed Susan, you can see the flowers that are actually starting to bloom are the very farthest outside edge on this plant. So all this black in the center are flowers that are going to be occurring very soon. And then on this rosin weed, this is just blooming here on this outside edge as well, and still to be flowered on that inside. So you can really kind of gauge where the bees are going to be landing by knowing where those flowers are actually open at, and know that these are just like those flat top flowers we were looking at, like the mountain mints and the ironweed, more so than the coneflower and the gray-headed coneflower, where the bee's going to have to kind of circle around the outside because of its kind of round shape. They'll be able to land, this can attract a lot of bigger bees because there's just a bigger landing space. They a lot of area to just kind of stand without having to climb around. So you'll have from small bees to big bees landing on this, because it'll take a ton of energy to land here, circle around, and then leave. All right, and these are this is a member of the Aster family, and this is a member of the mint family. But you can kind of see the way that they have their flowers positioned. There are these kind of more like flat-topped flower arrangements here. And this Aster member, just like the coneflowers we were looking at, has a composite of a lot of blooms in one spot here. And this is, again, a mint family member, lots of little tubular flowers coming out of here. This is a mountain mint, and this is an ironweed. These guys are going to be great spots to just kind of sit and watch as pollinators just kind of like roam across them. It's just a big field of flowers for them to just kind of take their time and mosey across. But you can see on each one of these, there's only a few actual flowers going at one point in time here. So they'll just start blooming all throughout this whole space over time. Same with this ironweed. But there's so many flowers in one little space, and it's nice and flat, so they'll be taking a lot of time and visiting many of these flowers, especially like the bumblebees. They'll just be climbing all over these. The little bees, they still like to kind of fly from spot to spot, so they might not stick around for too long in one area. They don't waste as much time crawling around as bumblebees do, and honeybees and carpet bees. But so you can see here on this big cluster, there's a little sweat bee here just kind of flying from this one to this one to this one, and you can see the honeybee just kind of working its way around these heads. So I'm really glad we were able to find this. A lot of the Baptisia flowers are already done, but this is one of the bigger bean flowers. So the bean family members have really unique flowers, but this is one of the biggest ones, so it's going to be great to see on camera. This is a interesting flower in the sense that bumblebees are going to be one of the main pollinators of this, and they're the first ones to kind of like open up the flower to where other bees can then visit it. But so right now, if you were to take a close-up look at this flower, you might not see any of the male or female parts to the flower because they are hidden behind a little bit of a trap. Bean flowers have these unique petals. This is the banner petal up here, the showy one that attracts the bees in. You can see a little bit of color to it. This is the white Baptisia. But then the bee lands on this, and let me put it this way, and this is called the keel. These are two petals kind of put together, and the bumblebee is strong enough to push that keel down and expose the male and female flower parts. So it's pretty cool, but then after enough bumblebees have kind of visited this, it kind of props the whole thing open like that to where other bees can go in and kind of get the scraps. So pretty cool.
A little bit close.
But so most bean flowers that you would see, like a redbud flower or desmodiums, things. If you have some beans in your yard, this is probably going to be what the bean flower looks like, but probably on some smaller scale. So that's how these work. So with those Baptisias, some of those bean family members, they're going to be on, those flowers are going to be on long stalks, similar to this. And so you may only have a few flowers at a time, And as you saw with that flower, it's not going to be sticking around very long on the flower when that bee visits it, right? It's going to go push that trap down, get what it needs, and maybe move on to another flower if there is another one ready on this stalk. But there might not be another, so it has to fly over to the next plant. So you may not have a lot of time to take their photo on something like this, just because of the spaced out sequence of blooms on these. But yeah, you can see how far spaced out these can be, and you may only have 3 or 4 blooms at a time that are actually open and usable for the bees. It may look like there's 20 or more flowers on here, but they're just not all open and ready to be used. All right, so when you have a plant that has a trumpet-shaped flower like this, generally the bee will not be here for too long, depending on the type of bee. So things like hibiscus flowers, things like that. What's going to happen is you're going to want to watch and see, when you have approached this flower in your yard, do you see bees in it already? If there's one already down in there, no, you're probably not going to have a lot of time to take many photos before it leaves. You're probably just going to get a picture of its bud end, and it's hard to ID it from just that end. But as it turns around and it kind of backs out and exits, if you have on live photos, or if you're taking a video and doing screenshots of it later, or doing a burst, that's going to be your best bet to try and get a photo of like the front side of the bee, because it's going to be working in there and then hurrying up and getting out. Sometimes they may stop and stay here on the edge, but it's not always going to happen, and like clean themselves, get some pollen off, things like that. But generally, they're going to fly in here, do their business, and get out. This is just a one-stop, quick hit here. They won't be long. If there's multiple flowers like this in an area, then they might be actually going around and visiting, like on a hibiscus shrub or a perennial plant like that, where there's multiple flowers. But something on a vine like this, this is a spent flower, and this is a flower that's coming on in the next day or two. But so there's not a lot of these around. It's just this one individual flower. So you're probably not going to be wanting to spend too much time watching this flower for bees. But keep your eye on it, and just see if you see anything, maybe from a distance, out of the corner of your eye. If you see something going in, you can hurry up and run over there and snap a picture of it. This is jewelweed, and this is a tubular flower. As you can see, it's large here at the front, kind of, bugle shaped. The entrance for the bee is right here, and then the nectar is back here in the back. So the bee has to work for it to get to it. And so what happens is generally this is bumblebee pollinated, something like this. But that bumblebee, like a Bombus impatiens, will get in there, squeeze in, wedge in tight where its butt's hanging out the front. And similar to other tubular flowers like penstemon or foxglove, things like that, to where they're going to squeeze in, hurry up, get the nectar, pollen's going to get put on their back, and then they're going to exit and go to the next one. So you only have a little bit of time, and if you've spotted them already in there, you better hurry up and get that photo, because they're going to be exiting very soon. But so they really have to squeeze in there and work for it. Now, little bees, if you see a little bee enter into that, it's going to be really hard to get their photo because your camera's not going to focus on them. They're going to go deep in there, try and get some of the nectar that's been kind of spilled around by true pollinators of this plant, because they're not actually going to get pollen on them. The pollen's on the top of the flower, and it's meant to get on big things like hummingbirds and bumblebees. But those little bees will still visit it to get the resources. Just know that you'll have a harder time getting photos of little bees on something like this. It'll only be on the entrance and exit. One thing you might notice too when looking at white flowers, especially flowers that have a lot of individual blooms along the stem or on a flat top, are going to attract a lot of flies and wasps as well as bees. Sometimes even more so flies and wasps. So know that when you're looking at your white flowers. So things like Culver's root, your mountain mints, lots of the carrot family members, like Queen Anne's lace, those really attract a lot of flies and wasps. One that you might not think of as a member of the carrot family is rattlesnake master, which is a native plant, and it looks nothing like your traditional carrot family member flowers, where they're those big flat tops. It's a nice round flower head that looks more like a coneflower, missing those big long petals. But that one attracts a lot of wasps. So be aware of that when you're taking photos of those, that you might actually end up getting deceived and see some bee lookalikes. This is a native shrub. This is a shrubby St. John's wort, but we do have some other St. John's wort members that you might have in your garden, and they do not offer nectar to bees. So this and like some other plants that are mainly pollen rewards for bees, like hydrangeas, you'll see the bees land on them and just scurry around collecting up all the pollen very quickly. With this one, since the flowers are so small compared to the hydrangea they'd stick around for a little bit longer on. This, they're going to land, quickly gather up what pollen there is, in case there's not another bee that had already visited and took all the pollen. They'll just kind of scurry around really quickly, fly off, and go to the next. So it's really hard to get a picture of a bee on this kind of later in the season when like the pollen's almost all gone. And that's what we just experienced ourselves firsthand, trying to get some video of a bee on this plant. They will not stick around for long, so be prepared. Look for where, like right there, it won't be there long. That bumblebee is scurrying around. It's actually double checking both flowers and then hopping off to the next. But so, be prepared to look and be prepared where there are clusters of flowers, because if the bee's here, it's probably going to then fly over here or here. So just be prepared to move in those directions and focus your camera quickly on those bees. But hydrangea, something like that, you'd get a little bit more time because it's such a much larger flower than this. We should probably talk about specialist bees, just because of wanting to know what flowers to look at even for certain bees. With shutterbee, we're trying to get a diverse amount of species, found in everybody's yard, and so knowing to look at flowers that specifically have specialist bees that come to them. So this is closing up. This is a squash flower, and there's a specialist bee that visits squash, the squash bees. And then things like this is bindweed, but there's morning glories also, that the morning glory bee visits. So knowing which plants in your yard to even maybe focus a little bit of time on to check and see if you're having specialists visiting you. So things like sunflowers have the sunflower bee, and there are some specialist longhorn bees of other plants like ironweed. So make sure to maybe do a little research on specialist bees in our area and see if there might be any plants in your yard that might actually cater to those specialists, and see if you can find them. Another one's hibiscus bees. That's a really common one that we've found around St. Louis. So if you have a exotic or native hibiscus plant, you'll probably find the hibiscus bees visiting your hibiscus. So sometimes when I was talking about these trumpet-sized flowers earlier, this is the exotic hibiscus. The bees will generally, if they're coming in for nectar, just head straight to the back and leave. If it's a female bee, like the female specialist hibiscus bee, what she will do is come in here, land on the center part of the flower where the pollen is, collect a bunch of pollen, load it up onto herself, head into the back, get a nectar reward, and then generally leave. Or maybe do it in the reverse order. Go get some nectar and then get some pollen on the way out. So be prepared to, on this plant in particular, to be able to watch and focus in on a bee going around the pollen, or just going in head first and collecting nectar on the back. This is a really cool flower, another bumblebee pollinated plant, and it's solely pollinated by bumblebees. they can sonicate, so they can vibrate their bodies to release pollen. So if you have members of the nightshade family, or blueberries, or persimmons, and a few other plants that need sonication, the bumblebees can come up, vibrate their bodies, and at that specific range of sound and vibration makes the plant release the pollen to that pollinator. So know if you have this type of plant, they will be visiting and sit for a moment, just kind of like work around almost in a circle, kind of shake their bodies, and you'll have a little bit of time to get their photo, but then they'll be leaving. So no, you won't be seeing like little bees on this unless they're maybe just checking out to see if there's a few pollen grains left hanging there. Roses, so if you have a rose that actually creates pollen, not one of those big showy ones that's just got tons of petals, but if it actually has the male flower parts on your rose, you might get bumblebees coming into that as well and sonicating to make them release their pollen. So you may be looking mainly at forb flowers, so these big showy flowers, right? Well, grasses flower too, but they're typically wind pollinated, but that does not stop bees from visiting them, so you can always keep an eye on grasses in your yard, but they're only going to be visiting the male flower parts. So these right here, if you can see that against my hand, these are the male flowers that kind of dangle in the wind, and then when the wind catches them, pollen falls off, and they hope to land, those pollen grains land on a female flower far away. So bees don't actually pollinate these because they're not going to visit the female flower. There's no reward for a bee on these female flowers, but they will come to the male flowers, take the pollen, and skedaddle. So they're just basically pollen robbing.